Welcome to the lighter side of the spectrum, the podcast that celebrates the multiple hats we wear and the juggling acts we perform in life. Whether you're parenting kids and teens on the autism spectrum, navigating the ever-evolving healthcare industry, or building a more inclusive and impactful world, this is your space to find connection, inspiration, and growth. Together, we'll share stories, tackle challenges, and explore how innovation and inclusion create better outcomes for everyone. Because no matter the spectrum, there's always a lighter side. Now here's your host, David Kaufer.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the lighter side of the spectrum. I'm David Kaufer, and today's guest is someone I've wanted to have on the podcast for a very long time because she is a huge part of our family story in a very personal way. Dawnmarie Gaivin was the very first spelling practitioner Stone ever worked with. We spent 3 September days with her, 3.5 years ago now, 6 sessions total. And it's not an exaggeration to say those 3 days changed the direction of our lives forever. While we were there, I will never forget this. It was in the middle of one of our first sessions. I was in the middle of being completely blown away, which is something I'm sure Dawnmarie's used to at this point. But I remember just being astounded. And she turned around and told me, yeah, this is the paradigm shift. And boy, was she right. Dawnmarie has been the forefront of this movement for years. She is an incredibly productive and busy woman. She's the executive director of Spellers Freedom Foundation. She's also the co-author of the Spellers Guidebook with Dana Johnson, co-founder of the Spellers Method, and she was also hugely instrumental in Spellers, the movie, or the film, that dared to ask one of the most important questions we faced in the world of autism and non-speaking autism. What have we been wrong about non-speakers all this time? Today, though, what I'm most interested in isn't just the method or the movie or the advocacy, although I do want to talk some of that. I want to talk about Dawnmarie, the person behind the work. What drives someone to keep showing up in a fight this intense day after day? And what does it take to admit you're wrong? And how do we build a movement that's both pragmatic enough to win, but principled enough not to lose its soul? So with all that being said, Dawnmarie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so proud of Stone, and I'm so excited to watch his journey, but also your evolution as his dad, because it does change our lives too, right? When our kids can finally communicate. So thanks for having me on here, and thanks for letting me be a witness.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of surreal in a way, right? I mean, again, you've worked with so many non-speakers and spellers over the years now. I'm curious, how many have you worked with?
It's over 1,000.
It's over 1,000. Wow, that's incredible. Just you. That's you alone.
Yeah, it's amazing. And by the way, it never gets old. People like, oh, you probably don't remember me. I'm like, I actually have never forgotten a speller. I occasionally forget an aunt or an uncle that might have come along for the journey, but not on purpose, right? Because there's always a lot of people, when families have traveled a long way to come for 3 days.
Right.
But it never gets old. It is always... It's a blessing. It's a blessing to be able to do this kind of work, and to be there to watch families have that paradigm shift, those aha moments. It's really cool.
It's got to be. Like I said, I just know, speaking from experience. So I want to jump to that moment really quick. I'm just kind of curious. I want to get your backstory, of course, but what do you remember in terms of when Stone and I were there? And it's okay if you don't remember a lot. I think we're one of 1,000, but was there anything that stood out that you do remember about that?
Well, I'm always paying attention, and part of this might be because my background is in nursing. So and it was in trauma and transplant nursing, and which was very high acuity, fast paced fields. And so I am used to taking in a lot of information, like in a patient, let's say, in 10 seconds, because you had to. And so when a family is visiting and they're having their first sessions and intensives, as much as I am so zoned in on Stone, let's say, and his sensory profile and motor profile, I'm very aware of the gasps and the oohs and the ahs, or just the breath, the inhale of the parent who's sitting behind.
Yeah.
Because I'm not looking at you, but I'm listening and I can hear it.
Sure.
Yeah, and I can hear it and I can feel the energy in the room,
right.
you know? And of course, your child is so tuned into you that I often will pick it up because Stone's reacting, right? So, or I keep saying Stone as my example, right? But
whoever Stone is in that chair, right?
Yeah. And I think when you take that into, like, you're paying attention in the moment, which is why spelling for me is literally my mindfulness practice, right? Because you're so just right there when you're spelling. But I also have like an intake packet that a family has filled out. So I've got a little background story. I know if like one parent is on board and one parent, pun intended.
Which never happens.
No, never happens. That the other parent's being kind of dragged along, like kind of the doubting Thomas. I don't believe it. I've read what the naysayers say. So I'll have that background information. And so then I'm listening to the parents' reaction while the speller is spelling. So I think for Stone and you, I knew already you had done enough research. Like you weren't just like, I'm going to throw this at the wall and see if it's right. You had done your research and you had very, educated questions to ask. And so you were ready. You were ready to like see it, observe it as objectively as you could. But I think I could hear you breathing. I could hear your breath change when he'd spell a word where I already could fade out any, gestures or directional prompts so that you knew he did that whole answer to that question himself. So that's what I remember. And you were like, holy moly, like this is
was crazy.
Happening.
Yeah, I mean, the story, I love telling it. Again, it was just the very first, and Stone tells the story too. The first lesson you taught him was about Benjamin Franklin. You had pulled this out. And again, the whole thing was new to me. I just remember you going through it. And the answer that blew me away was, that wasn't in the lessons. You asked him, who'd we fight in the Revolutionary War? And he, spelled out the British. And that was my, oh shit, are you kidding me? Like, where did that come from? How did he know that?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
So it's great. Obviously come a long way since then. It's been incredible. But I want to, before you became known as, Dawnmarie in the community, who were you? You talked a little bit about the nursing, and I think that's really interesting because I'm sure that that's helped you in a lot of ways make the transition, which, not everyone has that kind of a background, but kind of thank goodness that you do, because I think it's really helped you in a lot of ways. But I want you to talk about that.
Sure. It's funny. I remember being 37 years old and I'm not saying this to brag, but when I graduated high school, I won Most Likely to Succeed. And at 37 years old, I felt like I was living Groundhog Day. Like every day I woke up, I did the same things, feed, take care of the children, help them co-regulate, do a little homeschooling, and then laundry, dishes, and back to bed. Every single day, I just did the same thing. And I tried to do it as best as I could and as present as I could and be as loving as I could. And I was always working towards communication for both of my boys because they both lost their speech. And so I was, in the hunt to get some form of communication back for them. But I thought, is this it? Is this all I'm supposed to do with my life? Just genuinely asking the universe, right? Because when I was in high school, I had applied to 5 colleges, and for 4 of them, I actually chose special education as my undergraduate major. The 5th school was University of Massachusetts, the Lowell campus, and it did not have an undergrad education program, so I picked nursing. And then I got a scholarship to that school. And since
I was going to ask you about that because I remember you that's one of the things you talk about in the movie, right?
Yeah.
That you said when you were younger, you kind of thought you always kind of saw yourself working in special education. So for you, you're like, yeah, this is kind of normal. This is where I thought I would be.
Yeah, and my dad volunteered with a couple organizations that would have picnics for the adults who were disabled, or at that time they considered them intellectually disabled. I kind of want to go back now with what I know now. I kind of want to go back and be like, I wonder if they could have all learned to spell and type to communicate. But I would help him at all these events. So I was always around as much as possible, right? Like an inclusive setting or events that included all types of folks. And so, it was finances. I got a scholarship to this college And I said, okay, well, I guess I'll do pediatric nursing. And I pivoted. And luckily, it was such an amazing nursing school, and I fell in love with it. And that's what I did for 11 years until I had my children, and didn't really think twice about it. But it's like the law of attraction. I'm the law of attraction I always wanted to work in special ed. And so I ended up having not one, but two kids with autism. And then at one or both, at any given time, I was always homeschooling one or the other boy. And one of them loved ABA. He actually really loved discrete.
Interesting.
Yeah, right. He loved discrete trial. He loved the predictability of it. And the other one was like allergic to it and hated it. And so I became a DIR Floortime provider because they didn't train parents, but they would train you if you had a license or a credential.
I forgot about that. I think, okay, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. No. So I actually got my Floortime certification really because, again, we're going back 20 years. There were long wait lists for service providers.
For anything. Right? Yeah.
So I was like, my kid was here. He was talking. He's now regressed and lost his speech and eye contact. I'm not waiting 6 months for someone to come and teach me what to do. I need to do something yesterday. So that's why I got trained as a floor-time therapist. And he's always been, that's Evan, he's always been the relationship-based, like you couldn't find a reinforcer for him to save your life. He is reinforced by the social connection and engagement. Of course, so is my second son, right? And if ABA is done well, you obviously fade out primary reinforcers and you're building relationships with these kids. But we all know there's lots of stories of ABA maybe not going well for some.
Right.
So, but I'm not anti-ABA. I've had great ABA providers in our day, and I've had horrible ABA providers in our day. But that was my story, is I got trained as a floor-time provider. And really, I was just on a mission to make sure my children could protest and be literate. I wanted them to be able to read because I grew up reading. So my number one priority was just making sure the boys had a way to communicate, which is sort of what led me down this path of turning over every single stone until both of them. Trey regained a little bit of speech. He's a minimal speaker. Evan never regained any speech, but he became my first fluent speller. So that's what led me into the spelling world. But honestly, so in San Diego, waking up at 37 going, is this it? I was just a couple years away from starting to work on a floor-time school. I wanted to open a DIR floor-time school here in San Diego, but simultaneously I discovered spelling for Evan. I mean, I knew about it for years, just for the record. I knew about it. I thought I had to teach him how to spell before I could put a letterboard in front of him.
Right.
So I spent 5 years making this poor kid manipulate these little plastic tiles to prove to me that he knew his letters. And I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know, right? And so when I finally just bit the bullet and did it, I talked to my team, my board for the school, and I said, why would we open a school instead? Why don't we teach all these kids to spell and type, and they could go to school with their neighborhood friends. Like they could go to the same school as their brothers and sisters and access curriculum that way. I think it was a little naive because we haven't come quite that far in inclusion, right? That's not really how the school system works, but I did pivot and ended up, creating the Spellers method and opening a Spellers center and all those things instead. So,
and I want to go back to that also because I want you to talk about the first name, the name of your first business, like what the business name was when I was there.
Yeah. Was it transcending apraxia at the time?
And I had no idea what the hell that meant. Yeah. Well, I'm still I remember I knew that there had this communication, and I'm like, I'm going to have to talk to her about branding because man, like this, what's apraxia? What the hell? It's funny because I think there's a point to that, right? Shows how, and as you pointed out, Dawnmarie, I mean, I like to think I was one of the more educated parents out there in terms of, I've been fairly involved in Stone's life.
Yep.
Like you kind of turning over all the rocks, looking for solutions, floor time, ABA, right? Like everyone else. But apraxia, I had no idea. I'm like, and then transport, what does this have to, I had no idea, right? In terms of that, which I thought is funny because like you're so far ahead of your time naming your business that and addressing it that even someone, again, not that I represent the whole your target market or whatever, but it's just that it was just such a disconnect for me.
Well, it's funny, when I was living in the Bay Area, my kids were born up north in Northern California. There were 5 moms, and we called ourselves, or someone named us, the Warrior Moms, before Jenny McCarthy wrote a book called that.
Oh, okay.
So we called ourselves Warrior Moms. We're like, she stole our title. Just kidding, Jenny. But we would meet once a month at this Borders bookstore near my house, and we would assign each other things to research in the autism world. And it could be anything
wow.
from a therapy to a supplement to whatever, you name it. So we knew about everything. Like, we knew about everything when it was like cutting edge. And then we'd come back and we'd teach each other like Cliff Notes versions of things. They would always give me the more scientific, like medical stuff to digest.
You're the nurse.
Yeah. They're like, what's this methylation support? Like, MTHFR, before anybody knew what MTHFR was, for, all these things.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? So vitamin B12, what is this about this in autism? Is it relevant? Does it mean anything? Or what about this sign language? What about this AAC device? Whatever. So we knew about spelling, rapid prompting method, years before. Like I said, that's how I was like, okay, I got to teach Evan how to spell before I'm going to fly him to Texas and figure if we can do this thing. But the apraxia bit, so I knew about apraxia because we'd be like diagnosing each other's kids. I mean, I'm not kidding. We'd be like, this really reads like it's apraxia. And wow. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor with our early intervention speech therapist, this woman was amazing. And mind you, I spent every penny I had on speech therapy for like the first 10 years because I wanted communication, right?
Yeah, that was it. That's the goal.
Totally. And I sat in every session and I practiced everything that they said. I created Evan's first PECS book. I taught him CERT's model, Barry Prezant stuff. Like, I mean, I read it all. Like, I have a bona fide PhD in so much autism education, but I sat there with the therapist and Evan and bacon. I had a piece of bacon in my hand, which this kid loved bacon, right? And I'm signing it and I'm saying, ba, just make ba. And he's going, ga, la, e. Like every other sound under the universe is coming out of his mouth except for ba, right? Mm-hmm. And I look at my therapist, the speech therapist, I'm like, is this apraxia? And she goes, well, technically, no, we can't diagnose it until he has, and she gives me the childhood apraxia of speech definition by Asha, which I'm going to misquote it, so please don't quote me, but it's like, X number, they have to have X number of words that they say incorrectly. I'm like, yeah, but he has 0 words. Like,
right.
He can't even make a syllable come out purposefully. Like, he can't even imitate ba consistently on demand more than once. So I had this inkling early on, but she told me no, because that's what she was taught, is that this can't be apraxia, right? But I still was like, well, but then there are days where I say, hey, Evan, put your shoes in the basket. And he's 3, right? And he walks over, he picks up his shoes and he puts them in the basket. And I'm like, score, he knows shoes, he knows basket, he can follow a 2-step direction. The next day, put your shoes in the basket. And he goes walking across the room and he picks up like the dog bone and he looks at me. And I go, so was yesterday the fluke or is today the fluke? So to your point about naming my business Transcending Apraxia, I had already gotten from all my data of just zoning in on Evan and Trey, there's this consistently inconsistent motor planning thing happening. Yeah. Definitely with speech, but also with behavior, right? Meaning whole body movements, behavior. And it wasn't until Elizabeth Vossler that actually I knew what to call it. Like, she's the one who's like, it's apraxia. And she was a speech therapist. I'm like, dang it. I knew we were right back then when he was 2.5 or 3, So yeah, transcending apraxia, because to rise above, right? To transcend. The business was actually originally called Transcending Autism and Apraxia. And I got a little pushback from some neurodivergent folks who called me and said, hey, would you consider changing your name? Because I'm offended at the idea of transcending autism. And I was like, okay. I'm like, sure, I'll drop it. I'm like, but here's, because I'm not autistic and you are.
No, I love it. Yeah.
And I go, but I have to tell you, because by now I'm running my spelling center, right? And I said, I just have to tell you that my clients don't all feel that way, right? Some of them don't even identify as autistic, and they definitely want to transcend the autism and the apraxia. But I totally respect that that's not for me to call, right? So that's when it got shortened to just Transcending Apraxia.
Interesting. No, I love that backstory. Gosh, there's so many ways to go, but I want to talk about apraxia a little bit more. I'm curious why you obviously figured it out, but I mean, you kind of created this group. Like, it seems like what you had, DM, was most people don't have, right? One of the things you hear a lot about is isolation for parents. Again, particularly when you talk about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, kind of our generation now, that's, our kids are in their 20s or, thereabouts. It was a different world. And so I'm happy for you that you created and had this group, but so many people don't. And I still feel like there's so much lack of information around apraxia. I've honed in on that so much because I feel like that's like 80%. I don't know what it is, but it's like 80% of what our kids are dealing with, it feels like.
I mean, I think for the non-speakers, it is like, I would almost hypothesize that it's not even autism, right? Like that what they have is the apraxia or dyspraxia more than anything else. They get the autism diagnosis because as a symptom, sort of like they don't meet they don't meet those behavioral criteria. So or they do meet the behavioral criteria. But because of their motor planning differences. Yeah, it's the Spellers community on Facebook, the reason Dana Johnson and I created that was hopefully to help with that isolation piece for folks. And it isn't run by me or Dana, right? Initially, we had to moderate.
Well, if you did, that would mean you've cloned yourself 2 times. I mean, because there's like no way humanly possible.
No, but it's a wonderful group because it is parents giving each other feedback, and it is, I like to call it non-denominational, right? Because there are many paths to typing and spelling for communication, and I don't think one path is necessarily better than the other. We did ask people in the beginning, like, if you're giving feedback or suggestions to another parent, it's helpful to identify which methodology you use with your own child, just so parents can make apples to apples like decisions, like, oh, is your advice relevant to what I've learned or been taught by my practitioner or provider or online course if I learned online. But yeah, I agree. I think that isolation is, it's a problem. I mean, it's still isolating. Even with my warrior mom group, we were doers, right? I would not say we were necessarily like this touchy-feely emotional. I mean, we were close, but like support group, we were just make a list, execute it, do the research, clone ourselves, and then disseminate the information. And that's helpful. But like, I think what's sometimes nice too is just hearing people who can relate to the challenges that you're facing. And for me, I had to find, it was Yahoo groups where I had to.
I was going to say, was it okay? Funny, same for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and to find people who had 2 kids with autism. Because I knew them all at the time. There was like 8 of us in the United States. And it's been a trip over the years, finally meeting some of them in person, because we only knew each other through these Yahoo groups. Because, I'd go to the grocery store with the BCBA and whatever, and they'd tell me how I was supposed to handle both of my children in the grocery store at the same time. And then I go, okay, you model it, and then I'll do it. And then they go, I'm like, yeah, it's not the same, right? You can write a perfect behavior plan, and then as soon as you're trying to keep 2 kids safe, it goes out the window, right? Like, I can't work on it.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, it was not my best laid plan, let's say that. 16 months apart, it wasn't planned, actually. So, but I'm glad it happened, because I think, I probably would have, in fact, my exact words at the time that Evan was diagnosed, Trey was only 4 months old, and I said, you know what, we can't have any more kids because we've got one with autism, and I think that's going to take up a lot of our resources. Yeah. Little did I know, right? Trey's following in the footsteps. A year later, I was like, holy moly. I'm like, now I'm overwhelmed officially. Like, and that lasted briefly, but as you heard probably in the Spellers documentary, and then I snapped out of it and got back to figuring things out.
But understandably, I mean, we could kind of joke about it looking back. I don't know if you remember this, but Stone's a twin, right? Yeah. Yes. So kind of similar. Again, his twin brother isn't autistic, but I don't care. Like, you have twin boys and one, high energy twin boys, and like you said, just kind of the whole idea of going to a grocery store,
totally.
Renee and I joke about like we'd go to a park and be like, you, Ty, you, Stoke, go. Like, go.
It was like this. It's like, you.
Right. And just like, it was just chaos. I can only imagine, just how stressful it would have been for you as well.
I'm glad I didn't have an Oura ring back then. Because the joke nowadays is, my younger son, he's 21 and he's a theme park aficionado. So we put in, 20,000 to 25,000 steps every Saturday or Sunday at a local amusement park. And my Oura ring, even when I'm having the best, most grounded day, is all super high stress zone because of the hypervigilance. You just got to keep your eyes on them at all times, even though they're long past the age of eloping, or they do take off, but they're not leaving on they're leaving with purpose. Like they're taking themselves to the restroom, only I don't know if they're going to go in the women's room or the men's room when they get there, so I don't want them to run ahead of me, so I'm just kind of on high alert all the time and not knowing how the world is going to respond to them. Because a man busting into the women's room isn't well received generally, even though it's okay. It is okay. And in California, you actually can go on the opposite sex bathroom, but nobody knows that's the law. Yeah. Nobody knows that's the law. But still, it's, the hypervigilance. I can't imagine what it would have looked like when they were 4 and 5 and I was grocery shopping, because it was definitely chaos on wheels.
So fast forward, to the Spellers and the movie. I'm curious about that because we never talked about that. Like I said, you and I met, we went down, we did kind of our 6 sessions. I was planning on making a regular trip to bring Stone down because it was just so exciting. And of course, then we discovered that we had a Meg practitioner a lot closer than flying to San Diego, and kind of did that, but stayed in touch. But then all of a sudden I hear about this documentary that's coming out.
Yeah. So I met the Hanleys in December of 2019, and I had just put out a podcast about like introduction to spelling for communication. And JB had flown to see Elizabeth Vossler with Jamie. And then his wife, Lisa, had listened to my podcast and said, I want to work with this woman because she's a mom, and I'm on the same coast, right? So she said, same coast, right? Yeah, she's like, so like, she was super happy with, JB's experience back in Herndon, but was like, I'd like to work with this mom. And so then she started coming down with Jamie. Actually, they both were coming down, but like every other week they were coming at first, which is why, Jamie got fluent pretty quickly, atypically faster than average, but partly because of how many hours they were able to log, like spelling every day, and how often they were able to come for some coaching. And, so it was a series of things that if you took the same amount of time put in, and his regulation, he was very regulated. He could sit, he could do the work for that long. He had that kind of stamina, that 3.5 months later, he was emerging open with me, and then the pandemic happened. And at that point, JB had already started writing the book Underestimated. So he started writing it right away. And by August, which was the first time I flew up to Portland during the pandemic, they already had the film crew at his house. And they were like, DM, can we get you for an interview? And mind you, my gray hair had grown out like 2.5 inches. And
it was a pandemic, right?
Yeah, right. I go, I'm not that vain, but I was like, no, like this is not the look I want for the documentary. So I spent the weekend talking to the crew and teaching them and like explaining like all the what's and how's and why it works and how it works. Which was great and they said, well, can we come down and film in your clinic for 2 days? And I said, yeah. They're like, you'll have to shut down your clinic. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. So, and they had this boy, Aiden, that Pat Notaro used to surf with. And he goes, he's like, I just want to get it on camera when a kid has their first open. And I was like, Pat, if I knew when a kid was going to have their first open, I'd have news. Yeah, I'm like, I'd have news crews there, let alone a kid that I've never met before. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. So anyway, the date comes that fall. It's like October. And Pat couldn't make it. Something had come up. So he sends his crew. and I do 2 sessions. I go, I need at least 2 days to spell with this kiddo, right? Because he doesn't know me. I don't know where he's at.
Right.
And his mom had been working with him for a little bit. But anyway, after the second session, I said to the guys, I'm like, guys, I don't think it's going to happen. Like, I can't, my number one priority is my responsibility here is to this speller, right? Like, and to support him and never push him beyond where he's really capable of going. And like, so I go, I don't know. But Aiden was so excited that like, and this happens a lot. The first night they leave from an intensive, they go home and I swear their brain just starts myelinating these neural pathways, right? And they come in so amped the next day that he was going to, I knew it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I think he might do it. Right. Like,
really?
So yeah. So I was trying to probe these little like 1-word opens to see if he could do it, if it would kind of fall apart, because of course I'm like, I can't help you answer this question if it's an open-ended question, you know? And so Pat got it. It ended up, that was live. That was real. Like him answering that question. Yeah. But the poor kid, because in case, you know, you never spell with a letterboard on top of a table. Right. But for the sake of the documentary, my board was that high so that the camera could see all the letters that the kiddos were hitting. And poor Aiden's like, oh my gosh, that's so high. So I'm like trying to get him to pick his head up. Cause I'm like, no, you got to sit nice and tall and your head up so you can do this. Cause it was a lot of work for him. But, yeah, and then the documentary, it took 3.5 years to finish filming it. So the 2-day adventure.
Oh, wow.
Turned into,
I didn't realize it took that long.
3 years once I was involved. It was like 3.5 years all in for them because it didn't get released until 2023, in March of 2023 at the Phoenix Film Festival. So yeah, it's a labor.
How did that change things for you? Or how do you think it changed things kind of for our community and just the movement and all that?
I mean, you know, what was so cool is like Jamie's, you know, that was his first fully independently typed sentence, let the revolution begin. And by that, I mean, he was typing independently with me at this point, but I was usually in the room. Like I was usually still sitting next to him or whatever.
Yeah.
So at the end of the movie, when he types that, no one's in the room with him. That was his first battle cry, if you will. Yeah, and I do feel like the movie, I think it started the revolution. I think it really, the awareness, the book Underestimated brought in a tidal wave of families who heard about spelling for the first time as a result of reading the book, but not everybody's a book kind of person.
Yeah.
And so the documentary, I felt like reached a broader audience. And that was the whole intent that the Hanleys had, was like, look, we had to hear about it from another parent. We just want to pay that forward and make sure other parents know about this, because there are people out there trying to stop this and it's life-changing. So we just want to do whatever we can to make it, you know, go big. And so, yeah, I think as far as then people knew who I was, but only, I mean, in this community, in the autism community, you know, and
you became a star.
I became a spelling star. But there's so many of us. I mean, there really are so many amazing providers and practitioners. And that's the change. You know, in 2015, when I started spelling with Evan, I think there were like 6 RPM providers. I'm sure there were more, but there were 6 that would travel around and do intensives. And it was like a 6-month wait list to get somebody to come to your area and whatever, you know. And so S2C came along and a training program for providers. And so now they started proliferating. And then with the book and the documentary, now there were more people wanting services than there were providers, you know, so it's just been a little bit of a catch-up game since then. But we'll get there, you know, because you can't, unfortunately, everybody wants everything fast and free. And I'm like, well, it has, it has to be.
It's neither of those right now. I mean, that's just not the way it works anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, and you need standards of practice, right? And it takes time for brains to make neural pathways and neural connections and then myelinate them, meaning they wire and fuse together and get covered with this sheath that makes them fire better and faster and more efficiently. And it helps overcome or transcend the apraxia. That doesn't just happen overnight, right? So That's why there's all this scaffolded support with prompts and cueing that eventually you fade out, and why you start on certain boards that have large targets and you gradually move to smaller boards with smaller targets, which are more difficult on the eyes and the hand-eye coordination. So that takes time. But in the scheme of like 10 years of 3 times a week speech therapy, and where Evan was at after those 10 years versus 15 months of learning to spell with me, like, and the quality of his communication and output as a result of 15 months of intensive work, mostly by me. I mean, he saw a provider twice, and then I took him to Elizabeth Vossler one time for just like a cherry on top. I was like, he was already open, but I was like, let me know if there's anything else I should be doing. You know what I mean? Like, is it, does it look good on aisle 7? Are we looking good? Like, are we moving in the right direction, kind of a thing? So, you know, in terms of things we could spend our money on, you know, in terms of things that my Warrior Mom group had explored over the years, this was the biggest bang for our buck with the least amount of financial investment, but huge amount of parent investment, right? Because you got to do the work. And so you got to be available to do the work. And sometimes you can't, because you got other kids and you got full-time work. And, you know, so, you know, when the time is right, it's right.
That's kind of the rub, so to speak.
Yes.
Is it does require literally hands-on work, and it's incredibly rewarding. Obviously, if you have the opportunity to do that, to witness it, like you said, it never gets old. I used the example, I think, in one of the most recent podcasts I was talking to producer Dave about. I said, you know, now in that Spellers Facebook community, there's probably 2 or 3 times a week, it seems like you kind of hear someone post something about their son or daughter becoming open, right? And just it's so emotional. I still get teary-eyed when like, because it just never gets old. It's so powerful. You brought up something I want to talk about, because I think this is really important. Because again, you're thinking about a lot of different things. Communication rights. We've talked about that quite a bit on the podcast and what's going on in New York. But you're talking about like having like the standards in place and how important that is. Because you and I had a conversation about a month or 2 ago, and I was, excited, Dave, as I tend to be, right, about like, my attorney, our education attorney who helped us with our case, our school district case, now has worked with other families here in Washington State, which is great, helping them get access. And one of them is like, hey, yeah, we'll help provide a communication partner in school. How do we do this? And it's like, how do we do this? And that's kind of like a big question. That's kind of like, to me, the next, like, what's next?
Frontier.
How do we bring this into schools? I talked about, and I know you thought about the same thing, right? We kind of have a system in place roughly with para-eds, or there are support systems kind of in public school systems that are supposed to provide support for our kids.
Yeah.
That might be a pathway, might not. But talk about, like, again, how you've been thinking about it and why it's not necessarily as simple as some people may think it is.
Yeah, it's funny. Good timing too. I'm meeting this week with some edupreneurs up in the Bay Area who have both a charter high school and a non-public school, and they want to bring spelling into both of them. And so we're having a roundtable 6-hour meetings to talk about, and we've written out this whole agenda about it, because I was like, there are some baby steps that have to happen before you're even ready to like bring in the assistive technology, right? Because letterboards are assistive technology devices.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree that the paraprofessionals and all that is there. What's interesting and what has to happen first is a lot of mindset shifting. And so the one downside I've seen from the ABA culture, if you will, is a presuming of incompetence, right?
Yes,
and presuming. Sure. And so that is literally it's like the kryptonite to a positive spelling experience, because as soon as it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. As soon as you think they can't do it, they won't be able to do it. And by that, I mean, because you're not going to give them the support they need while they're still in the acquisition phase. So if I think you don't know the answer to a question, you're a new speller, and I put down the letter board, I'm going to wait for you to try to spell it out. Now, if I think you know it, but I understand you have a motor planning disorder, I'm going to say, okay, get that first letter. Look, get your eyes on it. Go. And even though I'm not influencing which letter you pick with those prompts, I understand that I have to keep my voice going in order to put...
You're supporting it.
Correct. The motor planning, because you're still learning, right? You're still learning how to initiate, how to make eye contact, how to hold your eyes on it, right? So if you're waiting for them to fail, you will set it up for them to fail unconsciously. And so schools that have a huge belief in intellectual disability or presuming of incompetence, like that's a barrier, right? It's not impossible, but and then if you have speech therapists on staff who are feeling pressure by ASHA, then they might be the ones to block it, right? So the other I'm going to start with the obstacles, and then I'm going to tell you how it can work, by the way, because I've seen it work. The other is parent involvement. Right? Because the last thing I want to see happen, what is so wonderful about spelling and typing for communication is the parent piece when parents can do it, right? So obviously there's portions of the population who aren't getting access to this method because both parents are working full-time or working multiple jobs and like no one's spelling with their kid, right? So school spelling would be amazing for those kids. But if your kiddo can only communicate when they're at school, great, they can access curriculum, but is it really changing their life for the long term? Or does it go away with them? Does it go away when they graduate at 22, right? Like, so how do we bridge like old school days? Like, how do we bridge home and school? How do parents really become, they're supposed to be like on the IEP team, they're supposed to be considered stakeholders, but often they don't feel like it. They don't feel like they're treated as partners in this child's like education plan. So we'd have to go back to our roots to go, how do we work together? Because we have a shared common interest in this student excelling in life. Only you, mom and dad, you're going to be with this kid forever and ever, amen. So you have an even more vested interest, right? There's ways to do it, right? So there's ways to bring that in, but I think that's different from what schools are used to doing, right? And that partnership sort of model. And so I'm interested to talk to these edupreneurs this week. Dana and I have worked with an entire school SELPA in Chicago. So like 11 school districts, and the adult transition program group started it. And we went in the first year, we actually did 3 days of their back to school like staff training. And it was on presuming competence, and it was on motor coaching. And the executive director was like, look, we got to get people to stop trying to control bodies. It's not about controlling bodies. It's about coaching bodies. I'm like, yes, right? And you start there with like a school-wide, like presuming competence. What does that actually mean? Because when you tell people, if you told an ABA provider, you're not presuming competence, they'd be so offended. They'd be like, of course I am. Of course I am. I'm like, but do you know what that means? Like, do you know what that means when we say that, right? It's like that they understand you and that they can learn to do this thing that it doesn't look like they understand. And it certainly looks like they can't do, right? It just means they're capable of learning it. And
they're
now,
capable of learning, right?
Yeah. And if you put in the support and the right motor coaching, within a few months, they're going to prove to you they understood you from day one. And I always tell people presuming competence is like, just rent the idea. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to buy it. Like, just rent the idea, motor coach, and then they're going to start showing you what they know. Right. So that's like kind of the first step in figuring out like a pilot classroom where a teacher and, hopefully an SLP, but if not, an OT, like one of the other.
OT, I think would be great.
Yeah. Oh my God, it'd be so good, right?
Yeah.
And Dana Johnson had Invictus Academy in Florida. It's still there, but she's no longer working with them directly. But they train people as communication specialists. And so during classroom time, that communication specialist could go around and get answers from multiple kids. But again, remember, there's an acquisition stage where the speller is still learning to spell. And I don't mean learning to spell, learning to
learning to communicate.
Communicate through the letterboard. Yeah.
Through the
they know how to
letterboard,
spell.
through motor, whatever we're calling it now, motor-based communication.
Text-based, motor-based communication. Yeah. They're learning to accurately communicate on the letterboard. You can't start using the letterboards for schoolwork when they're still in the acquisition phase.
Right.
So
it takes time.
Yeah. And so teachers get excited. They're like, great. So can we start using these 3 boards and get questions so they can master their IEP goals? Right. So these are just some of the little nuanced things of going, there's got to be phases to it, like teaching it, finding time in their schedule where their paraprofessional can practice and get feedback and get coached on it. And so I don't think we've got the whole system worked out, but I did do a pilot. So besides the Chicago group that's still doing really well, I did a pilot in a local school district here in Southern California.
I'm shaking my head because you shared. Because that's amazing.
And I was trying to show a model for like a high school where I was like, you could have a resource room with one fully trained provider. Because like, I don't call providers communication partners, just so you know. I know it's like people use the terms interchangeably, but when I say I've trained someone to be a communication partner, I mean with one student, like your like your Stone's communication partner.
Right. Okay.
If you took a practitioner training program, David, you could spell with any kid with any sensory motor profile, and now you're a provider. Sometimes you might function as a communication partner, right? Where you're like asking whatever, attending at an IEP, but there's a difference, right? And so when you think about a school model, somebody there has to be trained as a provider who can make assessments and say, okay, this is the student's sensory and motor profile. Therefore, they should use these letterboards when they first start out. Okay, look, I'm noticing this pattern or trend. Pivot, let's shift to here. Let's use a flap to cover half the board because of this reason. You know, all the clinical reasoning that goes into getting them accurate and open in the smoothest and shortest period of time, right? Without racing, but just saying, we're not going to waste time spinning our wheels on a plateau, right? Like we're going to keep moving steadily towards the goal, which is open communication on a board with 26 letters. And so somebody has to have that clinical, so whether it's the teacher, the SLP, the OT, but somebody who's taken the provider training, but then they can train communication partners all day long. They can train paraprofessionals to work with each student, or one para to work with 3 different students, but that para should not take their skills then and just randomly apply them to a kid who looks and sounds like the kid they spell with, right? Because they often are over their skis. And those are some of those guardrails where I'm like, okay, you have to have really clear practice standards for letterboard usage in a public school, just for everybody's safety, right? Like, meaning like you got to stick to, for now, using them for accessing curriculum and communicating with your teacher on topic, whatever, because we want to be mindful of like people still learning, and because nobody sets out to influence a kid. And I know that's what the naysayers all say, is they worry about us influencing them. I don't believe anyone has ever in the history of time set out to do that on purpose. But if they do, it's because they weren't well trained, or they moved too quickly, right? And so if somebody just thinks they know what they're doing, you know, the Dunning-Kruger effect, they think they know, and then they just start randomly applying that skill to a bunch of other spellers, you risk influence, right? So these are things that I think administration, it's all figure outable, like it's all doable, but you have to have structure.
You have to have structure, and you have to have intent. You have to have people willing to put in the time and effort into it, right?
Yes.
Even on the school side, which is, you know, one of my concerns, frankly, is that a lot of times, being realistic, you know, taking off my naive, you know, hey, this is all great, we can change the world. From a practical standpoint, we know that usually change comes from, a monetary reason or legal reason. Like,
totally.
Otherwise, inertia, I think, just continues to set in.
Totally. Well, and I do think that's why the schools, most of the schools that are spelling today are private. They're private, or they're charter schools, because those are things that they have a little bit more control over, and or they can pay better, so there's less turnover in their paraprofessional staff, because that's always been a factor, right? For me in special ed, right? That's a thing. So if you're training someone to be a communication partner, what happens when they don't come into school that day, which is why this high school model that I designed, I was like, well, that's no problem. Like, the kiddos still get to go to their mainstreamed class. They listen to the content, and then they can come back to the resource room where the trained practitioner could help them with their homework, right? There's so much assistive technology. Evan now is taking classes at our local community college.
Oh, great.
I mean, dude, the disability service office, I was like, why it wasn't, in high school, our high school was good, so I'm not even complaining. But why aren't high schools and middle schools this accommodating with all of the technology and all the stuff that makes it possible for someone who's a non-speaker with an impulsive body, who probably will get up and leave the classroom 16 times in a 3-hour lecture because his body can only sit for about 15 minutes before it's got to move, not miss a thing. I'm like, all the technology exists. I'm like, why couldn't we just have that? Because instead, what I was told at certain stages of Evan's academic career was, he can't be in that classroom because he's missing out on the content. His body keeps getting up and leaving. Nobody had these other tech solutions for me, then I'm like, was it that hard? I mean, you could have just done a tape recorder. Maybe the app didn't, maybe the app didn't exist back then. I don't know. But like, nobody was creatively, they were just like, he's the problem, right? Like, he's the problem. That's why he can't access this curriculum. At community college, they're like, it's suddenly, I think because you're paying for it, I don't know, but they're like, sure, what else do you need? You want a note taker? You want a this? You want a that? I'm like,
that's great.
Yeah, it's so good. And Evan's like high on life because of it.
Oh, I love hearing that. That's great. That's awesome. No, I think it is. It's just it's a different mindset. I think there have been examples, fortunately, that do kind of trickle down from university colleges into public schools over time.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of how long will that take? In the meantime, all those who miss out. So I want to jump ahead. I knew this was going to happen, DM. We're like talking. There's so much communication rights, but I want to know, we have a couple of segments we like to do. Our autism tip of the week.
Okay.
So we're going to do that first, and we're going to kick that off with our jingle.
Hey, parents, gather around, it's time to speak. We're here with your tip of the week. Strategies and wisdom just for you. Autism parents, we know what you go through.
All right, now it's time for our tip of the week, and I want to know, what do you have for us this week?
Okay, I'm going to go back to a video I did a long time ago called How to Avoid the 5 Pitfalls of Being a New Spelling Parent. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but
I did. I watched your videos.
Yeah, my favorite tip to this day is to not feather the nest for your baby bird all the time. And by that, I mean, in the context of spelling, but you can apply this beyond spelling, right? When we sit down to spell with our kid, we could spend the whole session like adjusting the lighting, repositioning the chair, wondering, are they acting like this because they didn't get enough to eat at lunch, and finding the right music and making sure the lesson was intriguing enough and all the things, and like not actually get around to spelling, right? That's feathering the nest. And I get it, because back in the day when I was doing 3 times a week speech therapy and paying $125 an hour for that speech therapy, I wanted my kid to be in tip-top shape, right? So that when they got in there was nothing holding them back from maximizing that 45 minutes. And so that was all we could do to control what was uncontrollable. But so it comes from love, right? But and it comes from not wanting our child to struggle, and like we want to smooth everything out for them.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, like, the work is regulation. Like, they've got to learn to work through feeling a little bit off, feeling a little bit dysregulated, being hungry, tired. Like, if you just keep waiting for the perfect conditions, they never come, and your child's not learning to be resilient. So not feathering their nest, as uncomfortable as that might be at first, it's like, I think, one of the most freeing and loving things you can do for yourself and for your child.
That's great. And those videos are another example of how you're on the cutting edge, because they weren't out there, and you went out and you kind of created your own, little homemade videos that were great. I mean, they were a great resource. And to your point, your tip of the week, I actually use that with Stone. I mean, even to this day, as open, as great, of a communicator he is, there are times when he'll be like, I'm tired. and I'm like, well, work through it. Like, we'll get there. You can go to bed, you can take a nap, but let's finish, whether it's homework or whatever. Like, I can tell you lots of times I had to do homework when I was tired.
Yes. Right. It prepares them for the real world, right? And it does build their stamina and strength. So it's kind of like sibling relationships. I remember fighting so much with my brother as a kid. And then the day he went to college, we never fought again. He's like one of my best friends. But like you learn so much about interpersonal dynamics in the tough love, whatever situations in your home, so that you could go out and be a grown-up and not have those kinds of childish fights with grown-ups, right? So when you stretch your kid past their comfort zone, it's so that when they are in public and a little bit stretched, they don't completely come unglued, which can happen because of their sensory differences, right? So you're building their stamina every time you lean into what I call it, like the CrossFit cash out, right? The last 60 seconds of CrossFit when they make you do another 200 burpees. I'm like, yes, get it, because that's where you're building the most motor pathways too.
Are you a CrossFitter?
No,
okay.
I'm not. I aspire.
I was going to say, wow.
No, don't add that to my resume. No.
Okay, I was going to say, wow, that would be chef's kiss. Okay, let's go jump ahead to our autism fact or fiction.
Get QuickTime ready, and here we go. This is Autism Fact or Fiction. We're breaking down what's real, what's rumor, and what might surprise you. Let's go.
Okay, now it's time to break down a stereotype, a belief, a myth, or, something maybe that's true that people didn't necessarily know was true. And I know you've heard a lot of these over the years, so I'm curious what you've got.
Well, I was thinking about kind of what's on the news lately, and there's a lot of talk around like the profound autism diagnosis. And I think the fiction is that we're polarized, that there's two sides to this conversation. When I think if you really dig into it and think wherever you stand on the issue, right? Because it's a very contested space right now.
Extremely, yes.
So, the National Council on Severe Autism, they're pushing for a separate category, saying those of our kids with medical complexity and high support needs have this profound label. And then a lot of the spelling community hates it because it seems to be paired with intellectual disability. Like there's a co-commit and they say it's two things together as one. But I think I do understand their reasoning for wanting to differentiate, that the idea that putting somebody in the same category as an individual who can self-identify, who can speak, who has autism, who can speak, and who can self-identify as autistic, doesn't always reflect the same level of support and therefore services and all the things that somebody with more impacted motor planning needs has. So I understand the urge to differentiate, but I do think that the word profound can be a ceiling. And we've been fighting really hard as a community to not have our kids be written off as low functioning, right?
That's exactly my concern. I mean,
totally.
Yeah, that's my concern, let alone, like you said, some of the non-speakers who have voiced their concerns,
Totally.
Very eloquently.
I think that it's fact and fiction, meaning like it's true that this level, by the way, there weren't even levels when my kids were diagnosed, but like, level 3, they're like, what level is Evan? I'm like, I don't know. I'm sure he's 3 if he's non-speaking and impulsive and needs 24-hour protective supervision. But he's also going to community college and self-advocating, and we're working on a goal where he's actually in the community alone. I was like, my mother heart's having palpitations about this, but we're trying to see, can he actually go do this thing and have motor control without us walking with him? I don't know if he can, right? So, but like, these are things that if we put a ceiling on what they're capable of with a label, that can be dangerous. And hopefully through all the dialogue, we can all kind of find the similarities and empathize with each other in whatever perspective people are coming at it with, but also not limit any individual, right, by a label or a diagnosis that does put a ceiling on them because they worked so hard to be included and to be treated as deserving to be at the table, whatever that table is. It could be the Thanksgiving dinner table. It could be a mainstream classroom. It could be vocational employment. Like, yeah, I worry about there being a big divide, but I also understand people saying we need more services or supports, like one-to-one aids, one-to-one aids.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just don't see those being, and again, that's a whole nother discussion. And Dave and I talk, but no, I'll just leave it. Again, I don't see them as being like mutually exclusive. Like you could, why not talk about, I mean, we absolutely need services. We absolutely need support. There are going to be individuals who require support, but why can't you just label it whatever that support is instead of, like you said, this broad umbrella? Which I like, as you said very well, I'm afraid it could be a ceiling rather than something that could be really helpful. So I'm really appreciate you bringing that up because I've actually been curious about your perspective on that because it's very much a hot topic these days. Okay, last one for today. And I'm going to get you back here for sure. You know that, DM. Okay. Let's end this on a high note, though. I like to, I want to start doing this. We talk about a lot of heavy stuff, but a lot of great stuff. Obviously, you've done amazing work. What would you say is the light of the week for you? What's giving you hope?
The light of the week, ironically, is all the pushback we're getting right now, as it means that it's
working.
Yeah, there's momentum. The louder the pushback gets against spelling and typing for communication, the more I know we're winning, or we're on the right side of history at the very least, and that the civil rights movement is gaining momentum. And for every single student that I've ever met or worked with or future will work with, like it won't matter at the end of the day. I've always said this, and like at the end of the day, no matter how bad, like they try to roll back the funding and cut people off from this, parents are going to turn over every stone they can, right? They're going to try to help their kids. I just want to be able to reach all of them. Like, so like, I want everyone to have the opportunity, not just the people who have the resources and the means to do it. And I think we're going to get there. I think we're going to get there. So I think the pushback, the opposition is a good sign.
I love that. That's a great note to leave today on, because I agree. Like I said, we're heavily involved in this. And I think framing it as a civil rights issue, because that's what it absolutely is the right way. And I think it resonates with people as it should. And I think we just need to kind of keep hitting with that message. So, Dawnmarie, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me
here so much. And of course, all listeners, viewers, you know how to find me, David.Kaufer at Hey, that's HEY.com. Leave us a review, send us a message, let us know what you think. And until next time, we'll catch you on the lighter side of the spectrum.